The storm caught Katherine Adelaide off guard as her horse stumbled on the muddy trail, sending her carpetbag tumbling into the Colorado dirt 6 miles outside of Awahi in the spring of 1877. Rain pelted down in sheets so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead, and the temperature had dropped enough that her fingers were going numb around the reins. She had left Denver 3 weeks ago with promises of a teaching position waiting for her in a small settlement, but the school had burned down 2 days before her arrival, and now she found herself alone on an unfamiliar road with night falling fast and nowhere to go. Lightning split the sky, and her mare reared, nearly throwing her before bolting down the path with Katherine clinging desperately to the saddle horn. When the horse finally slowed, shaking and wild-eyed, Katherine saw a light flickering in the distance. A ranch house, sturdy and sprawling, materialized through the rain like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to speak aloud. She guided her trembling horse toward it, hope and desperation warring in her chest. As she drew closer, she could make out a barn, a corral with several horses taking shelter under an overhang, and smoke rising from a stone chimney despite the downpour. She dismounted on shaking legs and tied her horse to the porch rail, then climbed the 3 wooden steps to the front door. Her hand hesitated before knocking, aware that she was a stranger asking for help in country where trust was not given freely. But the cold had seeped into her bones, and she could feel exhaustion pulling at her like a river current. She knocked 3 times, firm and clear. The door opened to reveal a man who stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that filled the door frame and hands that looked like they could break iron. His face was weathered from years under the sun, lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth, and his dark hair held streaks of gray at the temples. He looked to be in his late 30s, and his green eyes studied her with a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Help you?" His voice was deep, rough as gravel. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Katherine said, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. "My horse spooked in the storm, and I've been riding for hours. I saw your light. I'm wondering if I might take shelter until the weather passes." Behind him, she heard the sound of young voices, and a boy appeared at his elbow. The child looked to be about 7 years old, with the same green eyes as the man, though his face still held the softness of childhood. "Pa, who is it?" the boy asked. The man glanced down at his son, then back at Katherine. She watched something shift in his expression, perhaps seeing how thoroughly soaked she was, how she swayed slightly on her feet. "Come in," he said, stepping back. "You'll catch your death out there." Katherine crossed the threshold into warmth and light. The house was larger inside than she had expected, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and she could see a table that could seat at least 8 people. But what struck her most were the boys. 4 more emerged from various corners of the house, ranging in age from what looked like 16 down to perhaps 4 years old, all watching her with curious eyes. "Thank you," Katherine said, water dripping from her cloak onto the wooden floor. "I'm Katherine Adelaide. I was supposed to teach school in Awahi, but when I arrived, I learned the building had burned down. I was trying to reach the town to find lodging when the storm hit." "Adam Irving," the man said. He gestured to the oldest boy, a tall young man with his father's build beginning to show in his shoulders. "This is my eldest, Matthew. Then James is 14, Samuel's 10, Lucas is 7, and the little one hiding behind the table is Thomas. He's 4. "Hello," Katherine said, offering them a smile despite her exhaustion. "It's a pleasure to meet you all. Matthew, take the lady's horse to the barn and make sure it's rubbed down proper," Adam said. The boy nodded and headed for the door, grabbing a heavy coat from a peg on the wall. Adam turned back to Katherine. "Let me take your cloak. You need to get out of those wet clothes before you take sick." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't want to impose more than I already am." "No imposition. My wife's clothes are still in the trunk in the back room. She wouldn't have minded you borrowing them." He said it matter-of-factly, but Katherine caught the slight tightness in his jaw. "Your wife," Katherine asked softly, "died 4 years ago. Fever took her quick." He said it the way someone might report the weather, but his eyes told a different story. "James, go get one of your mother's dresses from the trunk. Something practical." The 14-year-old disappeared down a hallway, and Katherine stood awkwardly in the center of the room, acutely aware that she was dripping onto the floor. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. Adam nodded once, sharp and final, clearly not wanting to discuss it further. "You said you were meant to teach school." "Yes. I taught in a girls' academy in Boston for 2 years before heading west. I wanted to do something that felt more meaningful than teaching wealthy girls how to embroider pillowcases." She wrapped her arms around herself, still shivering. "Though I'm beginning to question my judgment." A hint of something that might have been amusement flickered across Adam's face. West has a way of making people question things. James returned with a simple blue cotton dress and a wool shawl. Adam pointed toward the hallway. "Second door on the right. There's a basin and pitcher if you need to wash up." Katherine took the clothes gratefully and made her way down the hall. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt and a washstand with a cracked mirror above it. She changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with cold, stiffened buttons. The dress was a bit loose in the waist and short in the hem, but it was dry and warm, and that was all that mattered. She worked her hair out of its soaked bun and did her best to towel it dry before braiding it loosely over her shoulder. When she returned to the main room, she found the boys seated around the table, and Adam was ladling stew into bowls. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten since morning, and that had only been a piece of hard bread and some cheese. "Sit," Adam said, nodding toward an empty chair. Katherine sat between Samuel and Lucas, who both stared at her with open curiosity. Matthew had returned from the barn and took his seat at his father's right hand, his hair darkened with rain. "Pa made venison stew," Thomas announced from his spot next to Adam. "It's good." "I'm sure it is," Katherine said warmly. Adam set a bowl in front of her, and she noticed his hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. He took his own seat at the head of the table and bowed his head. The boys immediately followed suit. "Lord, we thank you for this food and for safe shelter from the storm. We ask your blessing on this house and on our unexpected guest. Amen." "Amen," the boys chorused. Katherine echoed them softly and picked up her spoon. The stew was simple but good, rich with meat and vegetables, and she had to force herself to eat slowly rather than wolfish it down like her hunger demanded. "You really know how to teach?" Samuel asked, leaning forward on his elbows until his father gave him a look that made him sit up straight. "I do," Katherine said. "Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, and a bit of science." "We don't get much schooling out here," James said. His voice had the awkward quality of a boy hovering between childhood and manhood. "Pa teaches us reading and numbers when he has time, but ranch work takes most of the day." "I can imagine running a ranch keeps you all very busy," Katherine said, glancing at Adam. "Busy enough," Adam agreed. "We raise cattle and horses. Got about 200 head of cattle right now and a dozen horses. The boys all pull their weight." "Except Thomas," Lucas said. "He's too little." "I'm not too little," Thomas protested, his small face scrunching indignantly. "I feed the chickens every day." "That's important work," Katherine said seriously. and Thomas beamed at her. They ate in companionable silence for a while, punctuated by the sound of rain hammering against the roof and wind rattling the windows. Katherine found herself studying Adam when she thought he wasn't looking. He moved with the contained efficiency of a man who had learned to do everything himself, from cooking to cleaning to raising 5 boys alone. She wondered what his wife had been like, what kind of woman could thrive in this harsh country. "Storm doesn't look like it's letting up," Matthew observed, peering toward the window. Adam nodded. "Road will be mud for days after this. Won't be safe to travel until it dries out some." Katherine's heart sank. She had exactly $12 to her name and no prospects for work if the school was gone. She couldn't afford to stay in a hotel for days, even if Awahi had one. "I can pay you for room and board," she said quickly. "Not much, but something." Adam looked at her steadily across the table. "Not asking for payment. You're welcome to stay until the roads are passable. We've got a spare room. Used to be for hired hands, but we've been managing without extra help this season." "I couldn't possibly impose on your hospitality like that without contributing something," Katherine insisted. "Perhaps I could help with the boys' lessons while I'm here. And I'm a decent cook. I could prepare meals to free up your time for ranch work." She watched Adam consider this, his green eyes thoughtful. Finally, he nodded. "If it makes you feel better about it, I won't say no to the boys getting some proper schooling. And I'll admit my cooking skills don't go much beyond stew and beans." "Then it's settled," Katherine said, feeling relief wash over her. At least she wouldn't be completely helpless and dependent. After dinner, the boys cleared the table without being asked, moving in a practiced rhythm that spoke of long, established routine. Matthew and James washed the dishes while Samuel swept the floor. Lucas helped Thomas get ready for bed, and Katherine found herself oddly moved by the way they cared for each other. "You've raised them well," she said to Adam, who stood by the fire stoking the embers. "They're good boys," he said. "Had to grow up faster than they should have, but they don't complain." He straightened and replaced the poker in its stand. "I'll show you to the spare room." Katherine followed him down the hallway past several closed doors. He opened the last one to reveal a small room with a single bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains in the distance, though all she could see now was darkness and rain. "It's not fancy, but the roof doesn't leak," Adam said. "I'll bring you some extra blankets. Gets cold at night even in spring." "It's perfect," Katherine assured him. "Thank you truly. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found your ranch." "Probably would have found somewhere else," Adam said. "You seem like the resourceful type." "I'd like to think so, but I have to admit the West has been more challenging than I anticipated." Adam leaned against the doorframe, and for the first time since she had arrived, his expression softened slightly. "It's hard country, doesn't forgive mistakes easily. But it rewards people who stick with it." "Is that what you did? Stuck with it? Didn't have much choice? This land is all I've got to give my boys, their inheritance. I aim to make sure it's something worth having." He pushed away from the doorframe. "I'll get those blankets." He returned a moment later with 2 thick quilts and set them on the bed. Outhouse is about 30 feet behind the house. There's a lantern by the back door if you need it during the night. We get up early around here, just so you know. Stock needs tending before dawn." "I'm an early riser," Katherine said. "In Boston, the academy started lessons at 7. "We'll be up long before that," Adam said with the faintest hint of amusement. "But you're a guest. Sleep as long as you need." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Katherine sat on the bed and let out a long breath. The events of the day crashed over her all at once. This morning she had been so certain of her purpose, so ready to start her new life as a frontier schoolteacher. Now she was wearing a dead woman's dress, and accepting charity from a widowed rancher with 5 sons. She undid her braid and ran her fingers through her damp hair, working out the tangles. Through the walls, she could hear the muffled sounds of the family settling in for the night. Low voices, footsteps, a door closing. It had been a long time since she had been around a real family. Her own parents had died when she was 15, victims of cholera, and she had been raised by a maiden aunt who valued propriety above affection. The teaching position in Boston had been a refuge, but it had never felt like home. Katherine lay down on the bed and pulled the quilts over herself. The mattress was stuffed with straw, and it rustled when she moved, but it was infinitely better than being out in the storm. She closed her eyes and listened to the rain, and despite her worries about the future, she fell asleep within minutes. She woke to the sound of voices and the smell of coffee. Pale light filtered through the window, and she sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. She dressed hastily, finger combing her hair and pinning it up in a simple knot, then made her way to the main room. Adam and the 3 oldest boys were already at the table, eating what looked like cornmeal mush and bacon. The younger 2 were still absent, presumably asleep. "Morning," Adam said when he saw her. He was freshly shaved and his hair was still damp. "There's coffee on the stove and food left if you're hungry." "Good morning," Katherine said. "Thank you. Can I help with anything?" "Just eat," Adam said. "Boys and I need to ride out and check the herd after this storm. Make sure none of the cattle got into trouble. We'll be back by midday." Katherine filled a tin cup with coffee and sat down at the table. The coffee was strong enough to curl her hair, but it cleared the last cobwebs of sleep from her mind. She helped herself to some of the mush and bacon, listening as Adam gave instructions to his sons about which sections of the ranch they would each be responsible for checking. "Matthew, you take the north pasture. James, you've got the creek area. Samuel, you're with me on the south range. Everyone keep an eye out for breaks in the fence line. This storm probably took down some posts." The boys nodded, their young faces serious with responsibility. Katherine marveled at how they responded to their father. No arguments or complaints despite the long day of work ahead of them. After Adam and the older boys had left, Katherine explored the kitchen more thoroughly. She found flour, salt, lard, some preserved fruits, dried beans, and a few other basics. The larder was well stocked but lacked variety. She could work with it. Lucas appeared first, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Then Thomas pattered out, dragging a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "Is Pa gone?" Lucas asked. "He and your older brothers rode out to check the cattle," Katherine said. "But I'm here. Are you too hungry?" Both boys nodded eagerly. Katherine prepared them the same breakfast the others had eaten and watched as they devoured it with the boundless appetite of growing children. After they finished, she cleaned up the dishes and then gathered the boys in the main room. "Your father said I could help with your lessons while I'm here," she said. "Do you have any books?" Lucas scrambled to a shelf in the corner and returned with 3 battered volumes, a Bible, a McGuffey reader, and a book of arithmetic problems. Katherine examined them with approval. "These are good. Let's start with reading. Lucas, can you read me a passage?" What followed was a pleasant morning of discovery. Lucas could read haltingly but with decent comprehension, and his penmanship was surprisingly good when she had him copy out some sentences. Thomas couldn't read yet beyond recognizing a few letters, but he was eager to learn, sitting on her lap as she pointed out words in the reader. They were in the middle of a basic arithmetic lesson when Adam and the boys returned. Katherine looked up to find Adam standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "How did the checking go?" she asked. "Lost 2 head in a gully. They must have panicked during the storm. Found 3 sections of fence down. We'll need to spend tomorrow repairing them." He removed his hat and hung it on a peg. His clothes were mud-splattered and he looked tired. "Boys behaving themselves. They've been wonderful students," Katherine said warmly. "Lucas has a gift for numbers and Thomas has been very attentive." Lucas beamed with pride at the praise, sitting up straighter in his chair. "I'm making dinner," Katherine announced. "I found enough ingredients to make something more interesting than stew if you don't mind me using your supplies." "Have at it," Adam said. "I need to wash up. Boys, you too." "Then Matthew and James, I need you to help me with the barn repairs. Storm did some damage to the south door." The afternoon passed in a flurry of activity. Katherine worked in the kitchen, preparing a meal of fried chicken, biscuits, and greens cooked with bacon. It had been a while since she had cooked for so many people, but the work felt good, purposeful. Samuel stayed inside to continue his lessons, and she found him to be a bright, curious student who asked endless questions about geography and history. "Have you really been to Boston?" he asked, his eyes wide. "I lived there for 2 years," Katherine confirmed. "It's a big city right on the ocean. There are tall buildings, cobblestone streets, shops selling everything you can imagine, and so many people. Thousands and thousands. Did you like it?" Samuel asked. Katherine paused, considering the question honestly. "Parts of it. I liked the libraries and the theaters, but it could also feel lonely, being surrounded by all those people and not really belonging anywhere." Samuel seemed to understand that in a way that surprised her. "It's lonely here too sometimes," he admitted. "We don't have neighbors for miles. Sometimes weeks go by where we don't see anyone but each other." "But you have your family," Katherine said. "That's more than many people have." "I guess so," Samuel said. "I just wonder sometimes what it would be like to have friends my own age, or to see girls besides just in town sometimes." Katherine smiled. "You'll have plenty of time for that when you're older. For now, let's focus on your studies." That evening, the family gathered around the table for dinner. Katherine watched as Adam tasted the chicken, saw his eyebrows rise slightly in surprise. "This is good," he said. "Real good." "Thank you," Katherine said, pleased. "It's nothing fancy, but I learned to make do with what's available." "It's better than anything we've had in months," James said through a mouthful of biscuit. "Maybe you should stay forever." An awkward silence fell over the table. Thomas looked confused by it, but the older boys seemed to realize that James had said something out of turn. "James," Adam said quietly, a note of warning in his voice. "I just meant she's a good cook," James mumbled, his ears turning red. "I take it as a compliment," Katherine said lightly, trying to ease the tension. "And I'm happy to cook while I'm here. It's a fair trade for your hospitality." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Katherine noticed Adam watching her several times throughout the meal with that same unreadable expression. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he resented her presence, or was simply trying to figure out what to make of her. After dinner, as she helped clean up, Adam approached her. "You don't have to do all this," he said, keeping his voice low so the boys wouldn't hear. "The cooking, the teaching, you're a guest." "I want to help," Katherine said honestly. "I don't like feeling useless, and besides, I'm enjoying teaching your sons. They're bright boys, all of them." "Their mother was the one who started teaching them letters," Adam said, and there was that tightness in his jaw again. "She had plans to start a school out here before she passed. Said all the children in the area needed proper education. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." She was. Adam was quiet for a moment, staring at the dish in his hands. "Sarah. Her name was Sarah. She was strong, stronger than me in a lot of ways. When she died, I didn't know how I was going to manage. Matthew was only 12 and Thomas was barely walking, but we figured it out." "You did more than figure it out," Katherine said gently. "You've built a good life for them." Adam looked at her then. really looked at her, and Katherine felt something shift in the air between them. It wasn't attraction exactly, not yet, but recognition. Two people who had known loss and loneliness, standing in a warm kitchen while a spring storm finally cleared outside. "Road might be dry enough to travel in a few days," Adam said, but his tone suggested he wasn't particularly eager for that to happen. "About that," Katherine said, "I was thinking. You said there aren't many children getting proper schooling in this area. What if I stayed on for a while? I could teach your boys and maybe some of the other children from neighboring ranches if their families would be willing to bring them. I wouldn't need much, just room and board, and I could help around the house." Adam was quiet for so long that Katherine started to regret making the suggestion. But then he nodded slowly. "It's not a bad idea. There are 3 other families within a day's ride that have school-age children. The McCormicks have 4, the Jensens have 2, and the widow Harris has 3. Been weighing on me that my boys aren't getting educated proper, but I don't have time to teach them everything they need to know." "Then let me do it," Katherine said, "at least for a few months through the summer. We could hold classes in your house, or set up a space in the barn if that would work better. It would give me time to figure out my next steps, and your boys would get the education they deserve. You'd be willing to stay out here, middle of nowhere, miles from town." Katherine thought about her alternatives. She could go back to Denver, try to find another teaching position, but those were few and far between. She could return to Boston, but the thought made her chest feel tight. Or she could stay here in this rough country with this gruff widower and his 5 sons and maybe build something meaningful. "I think I would," she said, "if you'll have me." Adam extended his hand and Katherine shook it. His grip was strong, his palm rough with calluses. "Then we have an agreement, Miss Adelaide." "Katherine, please," she said. "If we're going to be living under the same roof, we should be on a first-name basis." "Katherine," he said, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "I'm Adam." "I know," she said, smiling. "You told me yesterday." The corner of his mouth twitched, and she realized it might have been the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "So I did." Over the next week, Katherine settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to the sound of boots on wooden floors and the smell of coffee brewing. She prepared breakfast for the family, then spent the morning teaching Lucas and Thomas while the older boys worked with their father. In the afternoons, she worked on preparing lessons for when the other children might join them, and she experimented with the limited ingredients in the larder to create meals that brought grateful looks from the Irving men. Adam rode out to the neighboring ranches to spread word about the schooling, and one by one, the families agreed to send their children. The McCormicks were especially enthusiastic. Their eldest daughter was 14, and they worried she would never learn to read properly if something didn't change. By the second week, Katherine had 11 students ranging in age from 4 to 16. She transformed a corner of the large barn into a classroom, with Adam and Matthew building benches and a makeshift desk for her. The children came 3 days a week, and on those days, the ranch buzzed with young energy and the sound of voices reciting lessons. Katherine discovered that teaching on the frontier was nothing like teaching in Boston. Her students were hungry for knowledge, but also deeply practical. They wanted to know how arithmetic would help them calculate fair prices for cattle. They wanted to learn reading not for leisure, but so they could read contracts and newspapers. She adapted her lessons accordingly, making education feel relevant to their lives. Adam watched all of this with quiet approval. He was a man of few words, Katherine had learned, but his actions spoke volumes. He made sure she had everything she needed for her classroom. He listened attentively when she told him about each student's progress over dinner. And sometimes, She caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat a little faster. The awareness between them grew slowly, like grass after spring rain. It was in the way Adam held her chair when she sat down for meals, in how Katherine made sure to prepare the food the way he liked it, with extra black pepper on his eggs and his coffee strong as tar. It was in shared glances across the room when Thomas said something precocious, or when Matthew successfully solved a difficult math problem. One evening about 3 weeks after Katherine's arrival, she was sitting on the porch after dinner, enjoying the cool air and watching the sun set over the mountains. Adam came out and stood beside her, not saying anything at first. "You've been good for them," he said finally. "The boys. They're happier than they've been in a long time." "They're wonderful boys," Katherine said. "You should be proud." "I am." Adam sat down on the porch steps, stretching out his long legs. "But I know it's not enough, just me. They need more than I can give them. They need refinement, culture, all the things their mother would have taught them." "I think you give them exactly what they need," Katherine said. "You're teaching them to be strong, capable, responsible men. The rest is just polish." Adam looked at her, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed darker, more intense. "You have a way of making things sound better than they are. I only tell the truth as I see it." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the cicadas begin their evening song. Katherine was acutely aware of how close he was, close enough that she could have reached out and touched his shoulder if she had been brave enough. "Can I ask you something?" Adam said. "Of course." "Why did you really come west? A woman like you, educated, refined. You could have stayed in Boston, married some banker or lawyer, had a comfortable life." Katherine considered her answer carefully. "Because a comfortable life isn't the same as a meaningful one. I was teaching girls who would never use their education for anything except managing household servants and planning dinner parties. I wanted to do something that mattered, to go somewhere I could make a real difference. And have you found what you were looking for?" She looked at him, at the house behind them where his sons were playing checkers by lamplight, at the vast landscape stretching in all directions. "I think maybe I have," she said softly. Adam held her gaze, and something passed between them, fragile and promising. But before either could say anything more, Thomas came bursting out onto the porch. "Katherine, Lucas cheated at checkers and James says he didn't but he did, and now they're arguing." Katherine stood, brushing off her skirt. "I should go referee." "Welcome to my life," Adam said, and there was definite amusement in his voice now. Summer deepened, and with it, Katherine's feelings for Adam grew impossible to ignore. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day, wondering what he was doing while he was out on the range. Looking forward to the evenings when they would all gather around the table, and he would tell stories about his day in that laconic way of his that made even mundane events sound interesting. She noticed things about him that she probably shouldn't. The way his hands moved when he was working, strong and capable. The rare smile that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. How patient he was with his sons, even when he was exhausted from a long day of backbreaking work. And she thought she saw evidence that maybe, just maybe, he was developing feelings for her too. The way he always made sure she had the most comfortable chair. How he brought her wildflowers once, claiming he had just happened to pass them on his way back to the house, though she suspected he had ridden out of his way. The careful distance he maintained, as if afraid to get too close, but unable to stay completely away. The other ranch families had noticed, of course. Mrs. McCormick had pulled Katherine aside one day and said with a knowing smile, "Adam Irving is a good man. Lost, maybe, since Sarah passed, but good. Needs someone to help him find his way back to living instead of just surviving." Katherine had blushed and protested that there was nothing between them, but Mrs. McCormick had just laughed. Not yet, maybe, but these things have a way of working themselves out. It all came to a head on a hot July afternoon. Katherine had finished teaching for the day, and the other children had gone home. She was cleaning up the barn classroom when a sudden summer storm blew in, the kind that came out of nowhere and turned the sky black within minutes. Thunder cracked overhead, and rain began to hammer down. Katherine gathered up the books and slates, preparing to make a run for the house when Adam appeared in the barn doorway. "Saw the storm coming," he said, slightly breathless from running. "Thought you might need help." "I was just going to wait it out here," Katherine said, setting down her armload. "No sense getting soaked." Adam nodded and came further into the barn, closing the door behind him against the wind. Rain drummed on the roof, and lightning flashed, illuminating the interior in brief, stark moments. They stood there awkwardly, suddenly alone together in a way they rarely were. There was always at least one child around, or ranch hands passing through, or work that needed doing. But now it was just the two of them and the storm. "I've been meaning to talk to you," Adam said, not quite looking at her. Katherine's heart began to pound. "About what?" "About this arrangement. You teaching the boys, staying here." He turned his hat in his hands, a nervous gesture she had never seen from him before. "About you." "What about me?" Katherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam finally looked at her directly, and the intensity in his green eyes made her breath catch. "I can't stop thinking about you. Haven't been able to since about the second week you were here. I tell myself it's wrong, that you're young and could do better than a worn-out rancher with 5 kids and more responsibilities than sense. But then I see you at my table, teaching my boys, laughing at Thomas's jokes, and I think maybe I'm allowed to want something for myself again." Katherine took a step toward him. "I'm 24 years old, Adam, old enough to know my own mind, and you're not worn out. You're strong and kind, and you've built a good life from nothing. Any woman would be lucky to be part of that." "Any woman?" Adam asked, closing the distance between them. "Or are we talking about a specific woman?" "We're talking about me," Katherine said, tilting her chin up to look at him. "And yes, I would be lucky. I already feel lucky, being here with you and your sons." Adam reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek with one rough palm. "I'm no good with words, Katherine. Never have been. But I need you to know that I care for you, more than I thought I'd ever care for anyone again after Sarah died." "I care for you too," Katherine whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." "Frightens you how?" "Because I'm afraid of hoping for too much, afraid that this is all temporary and I'll have to leave eventually." "What if I asked you to stay?" Adam said. "What if I asked you to stay permanently? Not as a teacher, not as hired help, but as my wife." Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Are you asking me that?" "I am. I know it's fast, maybe too fast by some folks' standards, but out here, people know what they want when they see it. I want you, Katherine Adelaide. Want you to be part of this family, to help me raise these boys, to build a life together, if you'll have me." "Yes," Katherine said, the word coming out choked with emotion. "Yes, I'll have you, I'll marry you. I want nothing more than to stay here and be your wife." Adam pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest. She could hear his heart pounding as fast as her own. Then he tilted her face up and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, with all the longing that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "We'll do this proper. I'll get you a ring in town. We'll have the circuit preacher marry us when he comes through next month. The boys will be happy. Thomas has been asking me almost every day when you're going to be his new mother." Katherine laughed, wiping away happy tears. "He has. All of them have been hoping for it in their own ways. Matthew told me last week that if I didn't marry you, I was a fool. Smart boy. Gets it from his father, Adam said with that rare smile, and Katherine laughed again, feeling lighter than she had in years. They stayed in the barn until the storm passed, talking about the future, about plans for the ranch and the school, about what their life would look like together. By the time they walked back to the house hand in hand, the sun was breaking through the clouds, painting everything gold. The boys were waiting on the porch, and the moment they saw their father and Katherine holding hands, Matthew let out a whoop that set the others off. Even Lucas was jumping up and down with excitement, and Thomas launched himself at Katherine's legs, hugging her tight. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" he asked, looking up at her with hopeful eyes. "It means I'm staying forever," Katherine confirmed, running her hand through his hair. "If that's all right with you boys." "It's more than all right," James said, grinning. "It's perfect." That evening they had a celebration dinner. Katherine made a special dessert, a cobbler with preserved berries, and Adam opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. Even the youngest boys were allowed a tiny sip just to toast the engagement. "To Katherine," Adam said, raising his glass, "for wandering into our lives on a stormy night and deciding to stay." "To family," Katherine added, "to all of us together." They clinked glasses and drank, and Katherine looked around the table at the faces of the people who had become her family. This rough, unlikely, beautiful family that she had somehow found in the middle of nowhere. The next weeks were a flurry of preparation. Adam rode into Awahi and came back with a simple gold band that fit Katherine's finger perfectly. Mrs. McCormick offered to help Katherine sew a wedding dress, and they spent several afternoons working on a cream-colored dress with simple lines that would be practical for ranch life, but still special. The circuit preacher came through in early August, and they held the wedding at the ranch. All the neighboring families came, bringing food and gifts. The ceremony was held outside under a clear blue sky, with the mountains as a backdrop. Katherine wore her new dress and a crown of wildflowers that Lucas and Thomas had picked for her that morning. Adam wore his Sunday best, and when she walked toward him across the grass, his eyes never left her face. The preacher kept the ceremony short, knowing his audience was mostly ranchers and children, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Adam kissed her soundly to the cheers of their guests. The celebration lasted into the evening. There was music and dancing, with Matthew playing a fiddle Katherine hadn't known he could play. She danced with each of her new sons in turn, then finally with Adam, who held her close and whispered, "I'm the luckiest man alive." "We're both lucky," Katherine said. That night, after the guests had left and the boys were in bed, Katherine and Adam stood together on the porch, watching the stars. She was now Katherine Irving, wife and mother, a frontier schoolteacher who had found her home in the last place she ever expected. "Happy?" Adam asked, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Katherine said honestly. "It won't always be easy," Adam warned. "Ranch life is hard. Money's tight sometimes. The boys will drive you crazy. I'll drive you crazy." "I'm counting on it," Katherine said, turning in his arms to face him. "I don't want easy, Adam. I want real. I want this." He kissed her again, deep and slow, and she melted into him, finally allowing herself to fully embrace this new life she had chosen. The summer stretched into fall, and Katherine threw herself into her dual roles as ranch wife and teacher. She continued teaching the local children, but now she also took on the full responsibility of running the household. She learned to preserve food for winter, to mend clothes worn thin by hard work, to doctor minor injuries and illnesses. The work was endless, but she found satisfaction in it that she had never found in her previous life. Her relationship with the boys deepened. Matthew began confiding in her about his dreams of eventually having his own ranch. James came to her with questions about girls that he was too embarrassed to ask his father. Samuel wanted to know everything she could teach him about the wider world. Lucas became her shadow, following her around and helping with whatever she was doing. And Thomas openly called her Mama now, which never failed to make her heart swell. But it was her relationship with Adam that transformed her most profoundly. He was not a demonstrative man in public, but in private, he showed his love in countless small ways. He brought her coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. He built her a bookshelf when he noticed her small collection of books stacked on the floor. He told her she was beautiful when she was covered in flour from baking bread. He held her at night and listened when she talked about her day, offering advice when asked and simply supporting her when she needed to vent. And Katherine learned to read him in return, to understand his silences and his subtle shifts in mood. She learned when to push him to talk about difficult things and when to let him work through his thoughts on his own. She learned that despite his gruff exterior, he was deeply emotional and felt things intensely. She learned that he needed her as much as she needed him, that they balanced each other in ways neither had expected. Winter came, harsh and unforgiving. Snow piled high and temperatures dropped below zero. The school had to close for a few months because it was too dangerous for the children to travel. But Katherine didn't mind. She enjoyed having her family all to herself, teaching the boys in the warmth of the house while storms raged outside. One particularly bad blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days straight. By the second day, the boys were restless and bickering, and even Adam's patience was wearing thin. Katherine organized games and contests, teaching them new card games and starting a reading competition to see who could finish a book first. By the third day, when the storm finally broke, everyone was grateful to get outside again, but they had also grown closer as a family, weathering the isolation together. Spring returned in 1878, bringing with it new life and new hope. The cattle had survived the winter well, and Adam was able to sell a good number at market, bringing in much-needed income. He used some of the money to buy Katherine a mare of her own, a gentle chestnut that she named Copper. "You should be able to come and go as you please," he said when he presented the horse to her. "Not be trapped here all the time." "I don't feel trapped," Katherine assured him, "but I love her, thank you." She began riding out with him sometimes when he checked on the herd, and those rides became some of her favorite times. Just the two of them and the vast landscape, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in each other's company. In May, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was certain. When she told Adam, he was quiet for a long moment, and she worried that he was unhappy about it. "Are you all right?" she asked anxiously. "I know 5 children is already a lot, and adding another I'm more than all right," Adam interrupted, pulling her into his arms. "I'm overwhelmed. In a good way. You've given me so much already, Katherine. A full house, a happy home, and now this. Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Katherine asked. "I'm hoping for healthy," Adam said. "But if I'm being honest, a daughter would be nice. Balance out all this masculine energy." The boys were ecstatic when they were told. Thomas immediately began making plans for teaching the baby everything he knew. Lucas wanted to know if they could name it after him if it was a boy. Samuel worried about Katherine's health and kept trying to make her sit down and rest. James seemed quietly pleased but also a bit embarrassed by the whole thing. And Matthew, nearly 18 now and almost a man, told Katherine seriously that he would always protect his new sibling. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Katherine continued teaching, though she tired more easily and had to sit down frequently. The other mothers brought her gifts and advice, welcoming her fully into the community of frontier women. She felt blessed by their acceptance, by the way they had taken her in as one of their own. In the evenings, Adam would sit with her and place his hand on her growing belly, marveling when he felt the baby move. "It's been so long since I did this," he said. "I'd almost forgotten what it feels like." "Scary?" Katherine asked. "Terrifying," he admitted, "but also wonderful." "You're wonderful." Katherine went into labor on a crisp October evening. Mrs. McCormick and the widow Harris came to help, sending Adam and the boys out of the house despite their protests. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Adam paced outside for hours, his sons clustered on the porch, all of them anxious. Matthew stayed close to his father, ready to support him if the worst happened. But as dawn broke, they heard a new sound, a baby crying, strong and healthy. Mrs. McCormick came out onto the porch, beaming. "It's a girl," she announced. "A beautiful, perfect girl, and Katherine is doing just fine." Adam nearly collapsed with relief. He waited until Mrs. McCormick gave him permission, then rushed inside. Katherine was propped up in their bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up when Adam entered, tears streaming down her face. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Adam approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blanket. She had a shock of dark hair and the smallest fingers he had ever seen, curled into delicate fists. "She's perfect," he breathed. "You're perfect, thank you. What should we name her?" Katherine asked. Adam thought for a moment. "Sarah," he said, "if you're all right with that, after her mother. My Sarah would have loved you, loved that you're taking care of our boys. It feels right." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes again. "Sarah is perfect." One by one, the boys were allowed in to meet their new sister. Thomas was fascinated, touching her tiny hand with his finger and giggling when she grasped it. Lucas declared her the prettiest baby he had ever seen. Samuel looked at her with wonder, as if seeing a miracle. James was awkward but gentle, clearly smitten. And Matthew held her with the ease of someone who had helped raise younger siblings, promising her solemnly that he would always watch over her. The house, which had been a place of male energy and rough living for so long, transformed with Sarah's arrival. There was softness now, gentleness, a new kind of joy. Adam proved to be just as devoted a father to his daughter as he was to his sons, though Katherine teased him about being overprotective. "She's not even walking yet, and you're already planning to scare off any boys who might come calling in 16 years, Katherine said, watching him rock Sarah to sleep one evening. 17 years, Adam corrected. "And that's the minimum." Katherine laughed, but she understood. She felt the same fierce protectiveness toward all her children, biological or not. They were her family, her heart, her entire world. The years that followed were full and rich. Katherine continued teaching, with Sarah often sleeping in a basket beside her desk. The school grew as more families settled in the area, drawn by word of the excellent education their children could receive. Adam expanded the ranch, buying more land and increasing the herd. The older boys took on more responsibility, and Matthew began talking seriously about courting Emma McCormick, who had grown from a gangly 14-year-old into a capable young woman. Lucas proved to be gifted with horses and started training them for sale, bringing an additional income. Samuel developed a passion for reading and talked about maybe becoming a lawyer someday. James discovered he had a talent for working with leather and began making saddles and tack that people came from miles around to buy. Thomas was still young, but showed signs of being a natural rancher like his father. And Sarah grew into a bright, spirited little girl who had 6 men wrapped around her tiny finger and a mother who loved her beyond measure. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Adam surprised Katherine by taking her into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving the children in Matthew's capable care. It was rare for them to have time alone, and Katherine treasured every moment of it. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years," Adam said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Best 5 years of my life," Katherine said. "Mine too." Adam paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I never told you this, but that night you knocked on my door during the storm, I almost didn't answer. I was in a dark place, just going through the motions of living. Raising the boys, working the ranch, but not really feeling anything anymore. Then you showed up, soaking wet and stubborn and refusing to take charity without earning it, and you woke something up in me. Reminded me that life was still worth living fully, not just surviving." Katherine felt tears gathering in her eyes. "You saved me too, you know. I was lost, trying to find purpose and meaning. You and the boys gave me that, gave me a home, a family, a reason to wake up happy every morning." "To us, then," Adam said, raising his glass. "To storms that bring unexpected blessings." "To storms," Katherine agreed. They returned home late that night to find chaos. Sarah had somehow gotten into the flour while Matthew was distracted, and the kitchen looked like it had been hit by a snowstorm. Thomas and Lucas were covered in white powder from trying to catch her. James had cut his hand trying to clean up broken glass, and Samuel was attempting to bandage it while reading instructions from a medical book. Katherine and Adam took in the scene, looked at each other, and burst out laughing. "Welcome home," Matthew said sheepishly. "Never a dull moment," Adam said, moving to help clean up. Katherine scooped up her flour-covered daughter, who giggled with delight, completely unrepentant. "Never a dull moment indeed," she agreed, and she wouldn't have changed a single thing. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and milestones. Matthew married Emma McCormick in the spring of 1883, and they built a house on the far edge of the Irving property. Their first child, a son, was born the following year, making Adam and Katherine grandparents. James moved to Awahi to open his own leather-working shop, visiting every Sunday for dinner. Samuel left for Denver to study law, though he came home every summer to help with the ranch. Lucas stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and taking over more responsibility as Adam's hair turned fully gray, and his back sometimes ached from years of hard labor. Thomas was learning the business side of ranching, keeping the books and negotiating sales with a shrewdness that impressed everyone. And Sarah, at 7 years old, was already showing signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness, a combination that promised interesting teenage years ahead. Katherine was now 33, still teaching, though her classroom had evolved into a proper schoolhouse that the community had built together. She had 30 students now, ranging from beginning readers to young people preparing to head off to college or vocational training. She had accomplished her dream of making a real difference, of providing education to children who might otherwise have grown up illiterate. On a warm June evening in 1885, the entire Irving family gathered at the main ranch house for dinner. It was a tradition they maintained no matter what. Every Sunday, everyone came home. The table had been extended multiple times to accommodate growing numbers, and Katherine looked around at all the faces she loved, feeling her heart overflow with gratitude. Adam sat at the head of the table, now 47, but still strong and vital. He caught her eye and smiled, and the warmth in his gaze told her that he still felt exactly the same way about her as he had 8 years ago when they had married. Matthew and Emma were there with their 2 children. James had brought a young woman he was courting, looking nervous about introducing her. Samuel was home from Denver for the summer. Lucas sat between his father and Thomas, discussing breeding strategies for the horses. And Sarah was telling an elaborate story about a frog she had found near the creek, complete with dramatic gestures that had everyone laughing. This was what Katherine had found on that stormy night so long ago. Not just shelter from the weather, but shelter from loneliness. Not just a place to stay, but a place to belong. Not just a job to do, but a life to live fully and with joy. After dinner, she and Adam walked out to the porch together as they often did, leaving the children to clean up. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Adam pulled her close against his side and she leaned into him, perfectly content. "What are you thinking about?" Adam asked. "About how different my life is from what I imagined it would be," Katherine said. "About how glad I am that the school in Awahi burned down before I got there." Adam chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Strange thing to be grateful for, maybe. But if it hadn't, I would never have been on that road during the storm, never would have found you and the boys, would have missed out on all of this." "God works in mysterious ways," Adam said. "Bringing you to me when I didn't even know I needed you, when the boys needed you." "We needed each other," Katherine corrected. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their family inside, the laughter and conversations and occasional squabbles that meant home. Sarah came running out, launching herself at Katherine's skirts. "Mama, Thomas says I can't help with the horses tomorrow, but I can I?" Katherine looked down at her daughter's eager face. "If your father says it's all right, and you promise to listen to everything Lucas tells you to do." "I promise," Sarah squealed, then ran back inside to tell Thomas. "She's got your spirit," Adam observed. "And your stubborn streak," Katherine replied. "Poor child doesn't stand a chance." Katherine laughed and turned in his arms, looking up at him. 8 years had deepened her love for this man, transforming what had begun as attraction and affection into something profound and unshakable. He was her partner, her best friend, the father of her child and the anchor of her life. "I love you," she said, simply because she wanted to. "I love you too," Adam replied. "Every day, more than the day before." He kissed her there on the porch as the sun set and the stars began to appear, and Katherine thought about how a single moment could change everything. A knock on a door during a storm. A widowed cowboy taking a chance on a stranded teacher. Lives intertwining in ways neither could have predicted but both were grateful for. She had come west looking for purpose and found love instead. Or maybe she had found both, intertwined so completely that they couldn't be separated. She was a teacher, yes, but also a wife and mother, a rancher's partner and a pillar of her community. She was exactly who she was meant to be, in exactly the place she was meant to be. And as Adam held her close, and their family's voices drifted out into the night, Katherine knew that this was the happily ever after she had been searching for all along. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better. A real life, full of hard work and challenges and imperfect moments, but also overflowing with love and belonging and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. The Wild West had tested her, challenged her, demanded everything she had to give, and in return, it had given her everything she never knew she needed. A home carved out of harsh land, a family built from loneliness and loss. A love that had started with simple kindness and grown into something that would last all their days. Years later, when Sarah was grown and had children of her own, she would ask Katherine about how she had met Adam. And Katherine would tell her the story of a storm, a desperate knock on a door, and a widowed cowboy who had opened his home and his heart to a stranger. She would tell her about how sometimes the worst circumstances lead to the best outcomes, and how love can grow in the most unexpected places. But on this night, with the stars emerging overhead and Adam's arms around her and the sound of her family inside, Katherine didn't think about the future or the past. She simply stood in the present moment, grateful for every second of it, knowing that she had found her place in the world, and that place was here, with this man and these children, in this wild and beautiful country that had become her home. The cowboy had raised 5 sons alone until a schoolteacher came knocking, and together they had built a life worth living, a love worth having, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was more than enough. It was everything.